Hey folks, Todd Heitkamp, Jack Linneman with another episode of Inside the Tackle Box. It's been a little while. It's actually a change of seasons, and we're actually sitting in an ice fishing shack. I wish we were on the ice at this point in
Yeah,
time.
no kidding.
You know, it's not that far away, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode is early ice, things that you need to be aware of and things that maybe you never thought about before. And so that's the purpose of these episodes, to kind of get you thinking about it and also to ask some questions and for us to answer some of those questions. But some of the first things is, with the snow, the cold, how soon can we ice fish? I mean, we're launching this episode on Small Business Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. How thin ice have you ever walked out on?
Well, I'm not going to say.
So your mom and dad, yeah, you don't want to, bare your soul to your mom and dad and your grandpa that's going to be watching this episode. So
I'm not going to say I've ever walked in anything less than 4, but 4 is usually a good.
You're lying. Yeah,
maybe 2. 4 is a good rule of thumb.
You're a lot lighter than I am, my friend. And yeah, I mean, typically, I'll let the early ice go to some of the other more adventurous people before I actually I go out there. But the thing is that we need to remember is that when you're going out there on any body of water, any time of year, is to be familiar with it, to know where those springs are or any areas of bad ice. And would you agree with that?
Definitely, yeah. There's going to be, your typical areas, especially this year, like Todd had mentioned about the springs, especially in the north eastern part of the state. A lot of those lakes got a ton of rain this year, so all those springs, you may have water in them, and it's just a good idea. Maybe you fished in a boat or offshore, but just to kind of recognize those areas. Maybe there's a culvert on the lake, stuff like that. All your typical areas, they're going to just freeze later and have less ice throughout the year.
And that's the beauty of coming to a store like Dakota Angler or any local bait shop. They're going to be familiar with those lakes and then kind of help you out. So make sure you stop on by if you've never been to any of those lakes, and for sure we can try to help you out as much as we possibly can. But in all seriousness, the thing that we want to recommend is that most people should not go walking out unless there's 3 inches of ice or more. And then also the things to have is some proper safety equipment when you're out there. And I think no matter what time of year, you can never go wrong with the 2 things I'm going to show you. The first one is the safety picks, safety spikes. You can have these around your neck and make it very comfortable for you. You never know, and I always say there's never such thing as safe ice. You never know what can happen, and to have these things, it can be a lifesaver. And I know both you and I wear them all the time, and so we highly recommend them. The other thing is just the cleats. When you have just ice out there and just a little bit of snow, it becomes very slick, to say the least. How many times have you fallen on your butt?
Well, a lot less since I started wearing spikes, but I've definitely fell a handful of times.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. A lot of people will say, well, all I need is one. It's like they must have lost the other one or something like that. But no, you don't. You really need to have 2, and you need to have them, make sure that they fit properly for your boots. So 2 things I recommend for you, not only for early ice, but throughout the entire ice season. The other thing is a spud bar for early ice. To use that bar out in front of you to really test how thick that ice is. I know you use that regularly in the early ice, and highly recommend it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of on the fishing side of things now, I would say the most overlooked thing that maybe people don't think of is once ice freezes over and they go fishing, they're ultimately in ice fishing mode, which is totally fair, but they kind of overlook some of the areas where they may be catching fish later in the fall, or just kind of tactics they were using. From 2 weeks ago to 2 weeks from now, the fish aren't generally moving too much different of areas. So if you're catching fish later in the fall, some of the best areas to look early ice are going to be where you're catching fish in the past few weeks.
And when you're walking out on the ice, it is very possible, especially in our shallower lakes, that you're going to spook the fish because they're not used to having something walk on top of the water, so to speak, at this point in time. So expect that, but they're going to come back to those spots that you just mentioned. So let's talk about some of the tackle or some of the tactics that you use for early ice. What is some of the main things that you kind of look to?
Yeah, definitely. I would say early ice, I try to focus on maybe using a little bit more aggressive presentations, like your tried and true rip and wrap there. Usually your number 4 size for walleyes, or you can go down to your number 3 size if you're doing some panfish stuff. But I like to go with something more aggressive. It doesn't mean you don't have a smaller spoon on hand to maybe the rip and wrap or whatever it may be is drawing them in, but maybe you're getting them to bite more on the spoon. That's super typical, especially with panfish. But for walleyes, you're generally going to be able to catch a lot of your early ice fish on some of your more aggressive profiles. You think in the fall you're using a lot more, swim baits, and more of your plastics. They're not that much less aggressive in the early ice than they were a couple weeks prior.
So that's why I was going to ask you why more aggressive. But you're basically taking the same mindset that you had in the fall and just moving it ahead or moving it back another month with ice on the lake. So you're using the same type of ideas.
Exactly. You're using different baits, of course. You're obviously vertically jigging, posted a lot of your casting techniques like you will in the fall. But I think it's important that you kind of realize where, your bite in, just say, early December is going to be completely different than your bite in middle of January. The fish, although, they're not maybe quite as aggressive as they were in May or June, but they're still more aggressive than they will be in a couple months here once it's been more stable and cold for a long period of time.
And then plus some of our smaller lakes, and you're talking about in January, become a little bit more oxygen depleted, so they become a little bit more sluggish. So right now there's very little difference between the water that they had, now versus let's say a month ago.
Definitely.
So keep that in mind. Now, there's also, let's just talk about this real quick. This mindset that we need to downsize our baits for ice season. We in the fall we had 4 to 5 inch swim baits. Now we're going down to an inch type of baits. Do you downsize much, or do you just kind of go with what the fish are telling you?
Yeah, I definitely downsize from your bigger fall presentations. As we get in from maybe October to December here, your fish are definitely going to be moving less, which definitely means you might have to downsize some from your traditional, big fall baits. But at the same time, it can kind of help you because they're moving less, because they're going to be in some of those same areas, like I had mentioned earlier. Because they're not moving around as much. If you caught fish, just say 3 weeks ago, they're probably going to be there to some extent come early ice. So yes and no, I'll downsize a little bit, but early ice, I definitely like to use more aggressive presentations, just to kind of, seems like you get more aggressive fish and you maybe, I guess just be more effective.
Well, again, I always think that, like you said, you got to give them what they want. If you're sitting there using a rip and wrap and it's not working, you change it up to a different color, change it up to a different size, or change the bait altogether. And one of the new baits out there this year, it's from Northland. It's been very popular. It was a sellout at the Institute, and that's a twitching puppet from Northland. Have you heard many people using it now, and not necessarily for ice, but I know some guys were using it for some perch in the fall. But have you heard any comments about it?
With it being a new bait, I guess you only hear so much in the fall for people kind of using ice style baits, but it's definitely your jig and wrap style bait, but it's so much smaller, and you kind of get those erratic darting action like you would get in your regular jig and wrap bait. So whether it be they have an 1/8 and a 1/4 ounce size, so whether you're talking about your 1/8 for your more aggressive panfish applications, or your 1/4 for your walleye, it's definitely going to be a good option, because a lot of times if you're in a school of fish, some of your more kind of the opposite way that you'd think, some of your more aggressive baits will actually trigger them to bite, and then once you get the school started, then you can kind of go from there, and they all start biting.
So yeah, all these things come into play on early ice. And if you have any questions about anything that you saw here, or things that you may have thought about, make sure you stop on by here at the store. And if you can't make it to the store, give us a call at 605-336-9132. But make sure you check out the next episode of Inside the Tackle Box, because we're going to be talking about more ice fishing. And we'll see you the next time at Inside the Tackle Box.